Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neal C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where through the wonders of modern editing and technology, I'm able to edit out my offensive COVID coughs. And rest assured, I'm not going to be infecting any of you, but I am planning on inspiring you. And I think many technology leaders struggle to be highly connected to their teams and fully engaged with their families. Sure, they're wickedly smart, they have high IQs and know their business like the back of their hands. They live in a high-fueled tech world that is rapidly changing, and they embrace that. But, unfortunately, many are under tremendous stress too. And it's not their fault. They don't have time or energy or even knowledge to think about engagement, connectedness and emotional intelligence with their teams. But fortunately, it is possible for them to become more deeply self-aware, not just of their behaviours, but also to identify solutions for their specific challenges and fully engage and connect with their teams. And I suspect that every techie listening, whether you're a leader or an engineer, you'll have an incredibly analytical mindset. So identifying a problem and a solution is where you spend most of your time anyway. And after spending 20 plus years in corporate software and security companies, today's guest, Tenice Wehmeyer, began partnering with security and software leaders to create curiosity of the ripples and level engagement that they have with those around them, both inside and outside of the office. And then using that self-awareness, create new ripples of productive impact with their team, peers and key stakeholders, and more energy to devote to their life outside of the workplace. And for me, this is a subject that we don't tackle very often, but I do always say technology works best when it brings people together. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to San Antonio, Texas, so we can speak with Tenice. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Tenice. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, Neal. I am so excited to be here. I am actually a cotton farmer, and I'm a water dog. I love being in or on the water, like boating and fishing. And most recently, what I like doing is catching trout and big red. But in all reality, I spend the majority of my time working with leaders and leadership teams. And what I want to do is create organizational health through collaboration, through cohesion, and through clarity. So it's really all about helping the leaders have deep self-awareness on the impact that they have on those around them. And I like to call that their ripples. What are the ripples that they're making across their team and across their families?
You sound like a lady after my own heart there, because essentially you are a tech girl, but also you appreciate the great outdoors, right?
I do. I love being outside, and I try to keep my technology at home when I am enjoying the outdoors.
Oh, yeah, you can't beat just knowing when to switch off and go off grid now and again. And although this is a tech podcast, I am passionate about sharing the very human stories behind tech careers. So I've got to ask, can you remember where your love of technology came from and what lit that spark that put you where you are today?
You know, it's really interesting. I kind of fell into it because it is all about human connection. And for me, it's all about the people is what I like to say a lot of times. And I fell into technology through a career in human resources. So that's really where it started. But from the very beginning, in all my 20 plus years of the corporate world, I spent in software and security companies. And so that gave me a great appreciation for the advancement in technology and the ability for, the tech world and specifically the cybersecurity world to really be helping others. And so while you don't necessarily think about the industry as helping people, through technology, that's really what they're doing. They're helping people be better, more efficient, safer, protecting what's safe and what's important to everyone, from their data, their financials, their social, online, cloud information. Everything today is technology. But how do we protect it? And so what I like to do is I like to use my expertise in creating clarity for my clients to build those stronger personal relationships and those interpersonal skills so they can really focus on their expertise of protecting our data.
And before you came on the podcast today, I did do a little bit of research on you, and you'll be glad to hear that I came across nothing but great things. And I quickly learned, after spending 20 plus years in corporate software and security companies, you began partnering with security and software leaders to create curiosity of the ripples that you mentioned a few moments ago, and the level of engagement that they have with those around them, both inside and outside of the office. Can you expand on that for the listeners?
Absolutely. The one thing that I really like to look at is the effectiveness of the leaders in the organization. And in my expertise in working with technology leaders and my experience over my career, I find that unfortunately, a lot of times these leaders find it difficult to be highly effective with their team. And it's not because they don't have the desire or the want to or the willingness. Most of them are promoted into leadership roles because they were rock star individual contributors. They were able to really get everything done that they needed to in their individual contributor role. And then they're promoted into leadership roles, and they don't have the time or the resources that they really need in order to develop those leadership skills. Most of them are like really wicked smart. I mean, they have high IQs. They know their business like the back of their hands, but specifically cybersecurity is such a volatile and complex environment. It's rapidly changing, and it creates a lot of stress for these leaders. And so, when you're in a stress mindset, you go to what's most comfortable. And so for these technology leaders, that's going back to the technology and back to the processes. And it doesn't allow them to put as much appreciation and emphasis on maybe the human element in order to build the trust and relationships with their team that they need in order to be extremely successful across a high-performing team.
And if we dig a little bit deeper on that, like you said, you're now coaching cybersecurity leaders to have a greater impact by being connected and engaged with those that matter the most. But can you expand on that and the kind of approach that you take with those cybersecurity leaders?
It all starts by creating the desire and the curiosity of the impact that they're having on those around them. How self-aware are they? When they go in and they have these behaviors and they're trying to deliver results. They're trying to get things accomplished. They're trying to meet their goals, deliver their KPIs, and get, their bonuses even a lot of times. And sometimes they don't stop and think about what are their behaviors or what are those impacts that they're having on the others in order to get them to be highly effective and highly productive. And so I work typically through a 6-month coaching engagement to start out with. And I have a process that I use that is called ripples. So there you go. It goes back to the ripple impact. But what that really is it is 6 steps. And it really takes you through reflecting on who you are and who you want to be, impacting how do you see yourself and how do others see you? What impact are you having on others? And what do you need to do differently? And then we start practicing. What are those new skills and what does success look like? And how do we need to behave in a different way? And then we start perfecting those particular behaviors, looking at where we need to continue to improve. We learn from what's worked and learn how to make those our habits. And then we begin to expand on those and how can we sustain those new behaviors. So that was just a real quick process or framework that I use when I'm going through a coaching engagement, because it all starts about where are we today and where do we want to be? And then we work through the process to get there to make sure we're having the best impact possible on those around us. And it really does go for those around us inside the office, but then how does that transition to outside the office as well.
And I appreciate you probably can't mention a lot of the tech companies and leaders that you work with, but do you have any client stories that you could share that would just help listeners understand how you've helped teams?
One of my favorite stories is from one of my tech companies, and it was about a leadership team that really didn't have the trust and the courage, and they were siloed. And that's what happens, unfortunately, a lot when people are under stress and leaders are challenged to deliver a result. They start thinking about, what do I need to do within my business function in order to deliver the results? And it allows the dysfunction within their team or their organizations that they're not working together. And so one of the teams that I worked with, a wonderful lady named Melissa and her team, when I started working with them, they actually referred to me. I asked them questions, and I asked them about how much they trusted one another and their team members. And they'd actually, most of them worked together for quite some time. And they talked about how they trusted each other with their children. And so that was kind of their level of trust. But when it came to talking about their projects and their work, one of the ladies actually said, there is no way that I can trust Derek to touch my project plan. So while they thought they had this level of trust, they really didn't when it came to the work environment. They were really protective of their own work. So through a series of confidential interviews, so I go in and I interview each team member, I start to understand each member's perspective, their styles and their struggles. And what I can do is then go into meetings and observe their behaviors and facilitate conversations across the team in order to help them move from, trusting one another with their children to also trusting one another with their project plans or their babies at work, per se. And so we go through that process, and that really builds the foundation to be able to work together more effectively, to have collaborative conversations, to have the conflict where you can get to the commitment that you need, be able to hold one another accountable, and then ultimately deliver the results as a team versus focusing on your individual results, which often will get in the way of team results.
And as an ex-IT guy, I clearly remember what happens when a techie is in a meeting room with a stakeholder from another department, because some techies would lack that self-awareness, completely forget themselves and baffle their audience with science and tech jargon. I could see their eyes just rolling into the back of their heads as they did that. But one of the things I love about your work is how you're leveraging self-awareness to create these new ripples that you've discussed. Product impact with tech teams, peers and key stakeholders, and the energy to devote to their life outside of work too. But I also know that techies can be incredibly cynical. So I'm curious, what kind of challenges have you had in getting everyone on board within those tech teams?
Oh, it definitely, you have been there. You know that boardroom, that conference room that I've been in. And there's a couple of things. And one of the things that is really helpful is the fact that I've worked with so many techies, and I've worked with so many of the, whether it's sales or finance or different types of personalities in that environment, that I've really got this ability through years of practice to kind of it's almost a mitigation or a mediation type process that is between these two. But the main thing is to really help them become really in a space where they can understand that it's kind of what's best for the company type thing. So as I stated earlier, that over dependency on technology or process, when they get stressed, it's really helping them understand that they don't need to change that. They just need to include the connection with people. And I want to help them understand what's in it for them. So if they can make that positive difference in the people around them and make that connection with others, they're ultimately all going to have less stress and frustration, and ultimately get a better product out on the end of that conversation, because, I've seen it on both sides. You have the technologist or the engineer in the room who is telling the sales guy, if you just sell the technology I built, we'd be fine. And the sales guy saying, well, if you just build the technology that my client wants, we'd be fine. So how do they come together in order to really collaborate, be open-minded, in order to think about and figure out what's going to be most effective for the organization and ultimately for the client?
And what I love about everything that you've just said there is that there's 5,000 miles between us, and we've both been in those exact same boardrooms. And there'll be people listening to this podcast in 170 different countries right now. And I think that story that you've just captured there will resonate with people listening in every one of those countries. So I'm curious, do you have any examples of how leaders have created this self-awareness of ripples and the difference that it's made to them?
One of the things I do a lot is help a leader get feedback, because especially as you get higher in an organization or higher in your leadership position, actually the less you get feedback. And even if you ask for it, a lot of times people will not give the feedback, the honest feedback, because they're really kind of afraid to. And so one of the things I do is I work with getting that feedback. And I worked with Denise, who was a CEO of a small tech startup. And when we started, her organization had spiked to like 50% attrition. Everybody was just like, they were leaving at a high level, a high leadership level, because they could not work for her. And she had been there for about 5 years, but she had no idea what the lack of structure and accountability and discipline that she had in her organization, what a lack of accountability that was creating, and how frustrating that was making her team. And her team was really resistant to her leadership style. So that created constant friction and constant waste of energy. I mean, to the point when I went to do the 360. So I do a 360 interview. So I interview the people, have a live conversation more so than an online 360. And in these conversations, I was having people tell me very similar stories, even though we're in individual one-on-one interviews, about how unproductive they were because they were so frustrated about not having the information they needed, not being able to get the details, and Denise wanting to be in every decision-making factor. So she didn't trust them to make some of the decisions that they needed to make, and they couldn't move their business forward. And there were a couple of them that were actually really ready to quit, and she'd already had this high attrition. So once I was able to gather all of this feedback from these key stakeholders, and I consolidate it into a confidential report, so she doesn't know, exactly who said what, but we have the key themes and patterns that are coming out of this information. It really gave her the clarity and the deep self-awareness that she needed to see what was going on and why her team was wanting to leave and leaving, and why they weren't as productive as she knew they could be. And so once and it takes a while sometimes for that feedback to settle in. Yeah. And once that settled in and she started to open up and started to trust her team to make the decisions and manage difficult information that they needed to have, they really started building a more trusting relationship across the whole team. And so then they were able to focus on plans to improve their organizational structure, and for her to start working on, her accountability and her communication skills. So it was really great. And it was really, we went through the process, and then about 3 months of her trusting this team, the attrition started to stabilize and the culture started to thrive again with this team. And so it's amazing what uncovering those blind spots and getting that deep self-awareness can do for a leader and the team that they're leading.
And earlier in the podcast, you did mention a few examples of working with cybersecurity leaders, but I am aware that you work with a lot of tech companies and tech leaders right across the industry. And, of course, you're right in the tech capital right now over there in Texas. There seems to be so many tech companies sprouting up all over the place. So I've got to ask, what is it that excites you about the tech industry right now?
Technology is everything. I mean, the innovation, it's the future. Everything we're going to do moving forward is going to have a facet of some kind of technology, whether it's where we store our data or how we process or, AI, whatever it's going to be. It is innovation on a daily basis, and especially in cybersecurity, because when you go and you start looking at protecting our data, protecting our privacy, our identity, that is huge. And it's a space where what I think is interesting is where a lot of times tech companies are competitive and sometimes actually work against one another. While cybersecurity is competitive, it is also a space where people are coming together because it really is all about the good guys against the bad guys. And we want to protect what is ours, is our information from those adversaries. And I see where organizations come together. And we just recently, I just watched the government interview. I think there were 4 or 5 different leaders from Microsoft, FireEye, CrowdStrike, and SolarWinds. They were in front of the government talking about what can we do to make sure that our data is protected against threats like the SolarWind threat that FireEye identified back in December.
And the last 12 months has been incredibly turbulent, both in and outside of the tech community. But so I've got to ask, what's next for you? What's your primary focus this year?
It's interesting. I'm an extreme extrovert. And so this last year has been really hard for me. Shelter in place was not my friend. But I always want to create that ripple awareness. I always want to work with leaders and figure out what impact they are having on others. And so I'm really looking at continuing that through a virtual means. So podcasts like this, as well as webinars, and then hopefully eventually I'll get back in person with folks. But it really is all about having leaders pause and think about the impact that they're having on their team and on others in order to determine, am I creating productive ripples which are helping deliver results and helping people go home at night being relaxed and able to disengage from work and be present fully with their friends and family outside of work? Or are there things that are stressing them out, the weight that they're carrying around that doesn't allow them to be as productive as they need to be and doesn't allow them to live a full, joyful life and a life that's going to leave the leadership legacy that they really want to leave?
I love that, and a perfect moment to end our interview on today. But before I do let you go, where's the best way of people finding you online and also contacting you if they've got any questions at all after listening to our conversation today?
Absolutely. Of course, my website is the first place, and that is TeniceWehmeyer.com. I'll spell that because it's not the simplest. So it's obviously www.TeniceWehmeyer.com. And then they can email me at info@TeniceWehmeyer.com. And of course, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter and soon on YouTube. So that's not up there yet, but I am looking to get my YouTube channel also going this year. And then on my website, there is a link to Connect and Explore, where individuals can schedule a free 30-minute session to discuss, what working together might look like if they are looking to become more self-aware and increase the impact, positive ripples that they have on those around them.
Well, I've absolutely loved chatting with you today, Tenice. So there's so much exciting things happening in technology and protecting technology through cybersecurity. But I think we seldom talk about, or we don't talk enough about, the leaders and how we can invest in them to have a greater impact by being connected and engaged with those who matter most. That's what brings it all together. And I always say at the end of every episode of this podcast, technology works best when it brings people together. And that's exactly what you're helping to do here. So thank you so much for taking a few moments to sit down and talk with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Neal.
As I said earlier in the interview, as an ex-IT guy, I remember seeing what happens when a techie in a meeting room with a stakeholder or someone from another department, how techies would often forget themselves and baffle their audience with science and tech jargon. So for me, Tenice's desire to help as many leaders and cybersecurity leaders, to help as many leaders as possible be fully engaged with those that matter the most, is completely priceless. But I'm curious, did anything we talked about in today's episode resonate with you? You've heard my stories and you've heard Tenice's today. Have you seen anything like this in one of your boardrooms or meeting rooms on any day of the week, even though they're more likely to take place on Zoom? But is this something that resonated with you? And what experiences have you had? So I invite you to share those with me by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Let me know and we'll share them on here. But we're at the end of another episode again. The days, weeks, months and years are flying by. But I will be here again tomorrow in your podcast feed with another episode waiting for you. With another episode for your listening pleasure. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neal C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.